everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. I want to welcome everybody to the Board of Education Audit meeting, and I would like to call this meeting to order. Dr. Albright, if I can have a roll call, please.
Renette Apodaca, Sarah Brownstein, Josefina Dominguez, Scott Elder.
He's here. I see him.
I'm sorry, here. I thought I said it. I guess I don't know how to work this technology.
I told you.
Thank you, sir. Danielle Gonzalez, Courtney Jackson,
Here.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova,
Here.
Barbara Peterson,
Here.
Heather Snenden, Crystal Tapia Romero,
Here.
Igimola Aragon.
Here. Okay, committee members may attend the APS board meeting in person at the Allison Bruce King Educational Complex, 6400 Uptown Boulevard, Northeast, or by watching the live stream on the APS Board of Education YouTube channel. So our next item for consideration and action is adoption of the January 24th, 2023 Audit Committee meeting agenda and approval of the July 26th, 2022, August 24th, 2022, and November 8th, 2022 Audit Committee meeting minutes. And what I would just like is whenever we are moving for acceptance of an agenda item, if we are going to try to be a lot more specific about it, that is just a lot easier for us if we could do that. So whoever does make the motion, if you could just be specific, I'd appreciate it.
So I will move for approval of adoption of the January 24th Audit Committee meeting agenda and approval of the July 26, 2022, August 24, 2022, and November 8th, 2022 Audit Committee meeting minutes.
I'll second. It's Yolanda.
Wonderful. Thank you both. And if I could have a roll call, Dr. Albright.
Renette Apodaca,
Yes.
Sarah Brownstein, Josefina Dominguez. I believe she's having trouble logging on. Scott Elder,
Yes.
Danielle Gonzalez,
Yes.
Courtney Jackson,
Yes.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova,
Yes.
Barbara Peterson,
Yes.
Heather Snenden, Crystal Tapia Romero,
Yes.
and Peggy Mola Aragon.
Yes, thank you. And our next item up for discussion is presentation of the fiscal year 2022 audited financial statement. And this is just a discussion item. So I believe, Mr. Turnbull, you will have the floor, and then Ms. Herrera, or both of you together. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Superintendent Elder. This discussion brief is a presentation of the fiscal year 2022 audited financial statements by our independent auditor. The audit report has been released by the Office of the State Auditor and can be accessed on their website at saonm.org/auditing/audit-report-search. The audit report was submitted on time per the state auditor rules. The audit report has also been submitted for financials for 2 awards. One to the Association of School Business Officials International, Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting. We've received this award for the past several years, and we plan to receive another one. We've also submitted our award to the Government Finance Officers Association. This is the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. So we're also have received that award for many years, and is hoping to receive another one. These awards are important for the district as far as our bond ratings, and are in no small part to my staff's dedication and hard work. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Sheila Herrera with Moss Adams.
Thank you, and good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and Superintendent Elder. As Mark mentioned, we did, the financial statements have been issued. They were released by the State Auditor's Office on December 27th and were made public. And so the financial statements are 5 volumes long. If you've opened the financial statements, the most important volumes to the district are volumes 1, 2, and 5. Volumes 3 and 4 are all specific to charter schools. The other volumes, volume 1 has the main independent auditors report, which we discussed during the exit conference. The opinion is an unmodified opinion, which is the cleanest opinion that the district can receive. You will also see additional paragraphs in that opinion, specifically on page V.I-1. So if you look at volume 1, that's where the report of the independent auditors is. And there are different additional paragraphs specifically related to the emphasis of matter for the implementation of GASB 87, which was the new lease standard that was implemented in the current year. There's also paragraphs related to the charter schools that had charter renewals that were going to end June 30th, 2023, and had not been renewed at the time that we issued the financial statements. And so those paragraphs are included in the financial statements. Volume 5 specifically has all of the finding detail. So while we did provide the number of findings for both the district and the charters, the actual written findings for everything is in volume 5, along with both the what we call the yellow book reports and the compliance reports. Those begin on pages 428 of volume 5. And did want to just point those out, as those are often, what we discussed during the exit conference. Any questions?
Does anybody have any questions of Ms. Areta or Mr. Turnbull? If not, thank you all. I think you all did a great job, and as well as APS. So thank you, Ms. Areta, and thank you, Mr. Turnbull, and all of APS who worked really hard on this. And it looks like we did a really good job. So all those awards are wonderful. So thank you. Okay, our next item for consideration is acceptance of the ethical advocate statistics for the period July 1st, 2022 through December 31st, 2022. And this is a discussion action item. So I don't know if Dr. Seguda and Ms. Reiser will be presenting, but you have the floor.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and Superintendent Elder. T.C. Reiser, Executive Director of the Student, Parent, and Employee Service Center. Today, I bring before you the ethical advocate data for July to December of 2022, which starts on page 12 of your electronic documents. As you can see, we have received 46 whistleblower complaints during July to December 2022. The reports in your packet provide a breakdown of the data by several different categories. The types and number of complaints seem typical to the previous report timeframes. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Okay, does anybody have any questions? If you do, just go for it.
I'll just chime in. So,
Okay.
Ms. Reiser, you noted that, they seem, I guess, typical for the time of year, except that our numbers have jumped up. Would you say that's also because we're fully back in person, or because we just didn't see as many during the last couple of school years, or I was just curious about that.
Member Cordova, I would say that we had a decrease in 2021 due to COVID. I do believe we've had an increase coming out of COVID. We often know that people file complaints when they're uncomfortable or when there's changes. And I think that's what we've seen coming out of COVID is people, we've advertised whistleblower a little bit better and added in emails to our list. So I think there's several factors that have increased the numbers through the years.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions?
This is Barbara.
Go ahead.
And this is really sort of this is definitely a qualitative, not a quantitative question. But lots of times when there are complaints, even when they're not confirmed, and I think it's important that there be a standard for confirming the complaint, absolutely. And at the same time, it's an indication that there's some kind of discord, that something isn't working for someone. And I'm just wondering if you can give a little just information about how you deal with these situations so that people feel like they've been heard and leave with a better feeling than they came with after they've made the complaint.
And just Member Peterson, I don't remember if you were the one that had asked the last time at one of the meetings, I think it was in July, if they had implemented a satisfaction survey. I think you had suggested that, if I remember correctly, and I think that would speak to maybe what you're kind of talking about. So if TCU can kind of answer, Member Peterson's along with if you have implemented a satisfaction survey.
Member Peterson, we have begun adding a second level to all of the complaints. So when a complaint is made, say against, I'll just use an example, say against a principal, I ensure that the associate superintendent and the superintendent are copied on that to give those levels of feedback. And that way the associate superintendents who supervised can go in and kind of look at what's going on. We've talked about the satisfaction survey before, and that's very difficult because when an individual uses Ethical Advocate, even when I ask additional questions, we very rarely get feedback. I rarely get an answer back from them because Ethical Advocate is an anonymous way to provide information, and using a satisfaction survey when it is a complaint, if they don't get the response that they want, very few people are probably satisfied, but I don't get any feedback through Ethical Advocate, which is where probably about 90% of these are from. So, and I get anonymous complaints as well through email. So there isn't a way to contact the majority of the individuals that file complaints.
Mm-hmm. I definitely understand that. It seems like it sort of goes together with some of our other, not issues, but just as we work towards more welcoming environments and creating things like community schools where people feel like in person they have more access to working through issues and problems. I think the solution is beyond simply what your office does. And I know you can't respond to someone even if they identify themselves if there are issues that need to be confidential. So thank you for the report and the detail. That's something we had asked for a long time, and I really appreciate that. It really helps get a better view of what kinds of complaints are coming in and how they're addressed. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have a question. I guess so this is very helpful. I do agree, appreciate the information, the level of detail and the response. Considering that we as the board have one employee, I'm just curious how we know if there's ever a whistleblower complaint against our employee. Does that come up in some other way?
Member Gonzalez, when you're talking about one employer, are you talking about Superintendent Elder?
Yeah.
Okay. If a complaint is filed against Superintendent Elder, the procedural directive says very clearly that I do reach out to the board president and the board president does manage that complaint or work with me to direct the management of that complaint. So yes. The
And
board is
TC does, but TC, does it get wrapped up into this final report here too, in terms of a potential complaint
for Cordova,
in the
yes.
numbers?
those-
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And then my question to that is, President Cordova, then the board, you know about it. Does the board know about it as well? Do you make sure that we do know about it?
I haven't, because generally the ones that are coming up, I've worked with HR or I've worked with legal, and there's like no, it's not confirmed. I mean, like it doesn't turn into anything. So, and I will just say that in my year last year, 1, 2 maybe, but they don't get confirmed. So I follow through with the process in terms of who I need to speak to at the district to help confirm or to work on that particular complaint. And then it just doesn't go anywhere.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that information. Does anybody else have a question?
I do.
Member Dominguez, go ahead.
So could you review for me what constitutes confirmed? Because it seems like such a black and white system that, you know, we miss details that may be to our detriment.
I would say that, okay, so I'm not going to speak generally. I'll speak generally about the ones that I've seen, but because they're also anonymous, you can't really follow up.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and TC, you might want to speak about that. But generally on these particular complaints, they're anonymous. And so it's kind of very broad, and you're just sort of dealing with hearsay kind of thing. And so you go through and you try to work through those pieces. And I think there's other avenues for individuals to complain that is not anonymous. And that, you know, that takes a different route. So, and that's, I think, what's happening with TC on these as well, correct? TC, they come in anonymously. So you try to do some like root cause analysis. You're sort of looking to see, you know, where there's some incidences, but when you don't know who the individual is, it's hard to to follow up.
Yes, Member Dominguez and Member Cordova. The majority of the complaints that I get are anonymous. I do always follow up if there's additional questions or providing feedback. The individual that filed the complaint, even if the response is through Ethical Advocate, if it were a confirmed complaint, I do let them know that the situation is being managed, that, you know, so I give them the feedback. If it is a personnel issue, I can't share personnel information, but I let them know that it is a personnel issue that has been managed. So everyone gets feedback through Ethical Advocate, or if I get an email where I do have a contact, that occurs. But I do also get some in the mail that are anonymous, for example, and Ethical Advocate is anonymous. So everybody gets feedback. You asked about how do I tell if it's confirmed. Basically, the supervisor looks into the situation and determines whether, yes, there's, you know, it is or is not happening, but then they still can follow up with their employee on how to better manage that situation.
The other thing I think is important to add, board members, is that sometimes these investigations might include EOS. We might bring in an outside investigator to support the investigation. So whereas it may be anonymous, as long as the report is specific, whether it's financial, whether it's a management issue, personnel issue, the point is someone goes and investigates it. And whether that's directly asking the person impacted to, you know, give me a side of the story of this, sometimes they go in and interview people inside the department. So there is an investigation, and that's where you get to confirmed or non-confirmed. Simply put, sometimes people see something and they interpret what they're seeing, and they say this must be because of, and sometimes there is an actual story behind that. Now, that may be a personnel matter. Someone may have received discipline and they didn't see it, so they assume nothing happened and they'll make a complaint. That's where sometimes it gets a little tricky with the anonymous part of it and the inability to share all the personnel details with the anonymous complainant. But they all get investigated by someone either from the district or someone we use for EOS perhaps.
Thank you. I think back to Barbara or Board Member Peterson's point, it's hard to know what all these not confirmed numbers mean, right? Just for all the reasons you just stated. But there is, I know bad behavior has been on the rise after the pandemic. And I don't know how that would fit into this, but it just seems, I don't know. I don't know that this helps us. If you just look at it, it tells you that there's discord. But I don't know that that's a fair representation either, given the anonymity of the system and I do wish we could get a feel for staff feedback, just work culture, school culture, and that's all I can say, I guess, about this.
I was going to say that I think a lot of and it's not that I've seen any of these, but just my experience is that even with parents that I've spoken to that choose to use this route to go through an anonymous route, is they don't really want to be called out because they fear that they might have retaliation. But sometimes too, it's their concerns about something. It's just like Superintendent Elder said, where they don't feel that the school is being fair, for example, or they don't like the hiring of someone, a decision that was made. And fearing retribution on that, or they'll say a claim like the individual that they hired is not qualified for this, and I'm really concerned about the decisions that were being made. And that's a kind of type of complaint that would be made. And then they still have to respond. So obviously there is some discord, there's some distrust, and usually sometimes it happens a lot after the hiring of a principal, because a community was not happy with the decision that was made, because maybe there's a division and one side wanted this and one side wanted that, and they'll make a claim that it was it was an inside job or something something to that effect. But generally, I think most parents or most people are willing to come forward without being anonymous, and then it goes a different route. It doesn't come through this one. These are only the folks that don't wish to be known.
Okay, thank you. Member Jackson?
Thanks, let me lower my hand. So I kind of wanted to go back to the procedural directive that Ms. Reiser and Board Member Cordova brought up, because I'm sorry to say I have not read that procedural directive, so this is kind of new to me in regards to our one employee. And so my question is regarding that procedural directive, how is it then brought to the board if there are trends that start to develop? How, if it's the president that kind of is the first point of contact, how is it then brought to the board if there are concerns that become a trend?
And I'm not sure who can answer that. Is that, I don't know.
Yeah. We haven't had a trend. So I would say that, I mean, I guess I would say if there was a trend, I would definitely bring it first to the executive committee.
Okay, I was one, like, is it written in the procedural directive how it's supposed to happen, or is that?
I think we could go back and revisit that procedural directive if you'd like. I mean, I will just for like, to tamper it down, there isn't a trend. So first of all, I think that's the first thing. But I would, as board president, if I saw a trend, I would definitely be bringing it to the executive committee first and we'd have a conversation.
Okay, and then the executive committee would kind of decide.
Well, I think we would
Next
have to work together. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that was new to me to hear that there's a procedural directive regarding that. So I don't know, Ms. Reiser, would it be possible, could you just forward that or type the link or something? I'd like to take a look at that.
I'm in it right now. So for what it's worth, it does say the executive director of Student Parent Employee Service Center shall track the number of and other appropriate information regarding whistleblower complaints regarding the superintendent for reporting to the Board of Education. So it does seem at a minimum, there should be some way to have the number and other appropriate information to the board.
And then we could bring that forward during the evaluation.
I heard whistleblower complaint, right?
Right.
Is that correct?
Correct.
All right.
Member Jackson, I can certainly put that information together to be sent out to the board.
Okay, thank you.
And so, I mean, I know it does say that, you know, to the Board of Education, but that does go to the president. And if that's something that we want to go further to all of the Board of Education, that could be something that we might want to talk about. And that might be a procedural directive that the board may want to look at. So if that's something that you think we should look at, then if you would make sure and let President Montoya Cordova know.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Because I
Absolutely.
think this rose just a whole bunch of other questions as we're in this topic now. Because the way I just understood what a board member Gonzalez just read, the procedural directive, is that it should go to the entire board, not specifically just the president. And I think just to make us aware of what has happened, even if it's not like we're not involved in the final decision making, but just the same way we got a report here for everybody else, and to keep us aligned with what the procedural directive states. So I think it will be important to at least get, you know, last year's data as we're going forward with the evaluation.
Member Tapia Romero, the procedural directive specifically says if the nature of the whistleblower complaint is about the superintendent of Albuquerque Public Schools, the president of the Board of Education shall designate an appropriate department or individual of his or her choice to complete an inquiry or concern. The president of the Board of Education designee shall forward the information, resolution, and any necessary recommendations from the inquiry to the executive director of the Student Parent Employee Service Center for appropriate follow-up. So that's what we have done. I can gather that information to go out to the board, which is the last paragraph.
And I recommend that we actually look at that in conjunction with the evaluation, so that we look at it and we pull it all together so that there's a context for that around the evaluation, you know, that's coming up now in February, so we can take a look at all of that.
Great, thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, and this is Barbara.
Go ahead.
I agree that I think it should be maybe during the evaluation, and it should be where we have the opportunity to have some discussion about context, because I think context is really important with, especially when they're unconfirmed. I mean, an example of an unconfirmed kind of complaint is, I mean, a teacher friend of mine had a whistleblower call on her for drinking on the job and being accused of being under the influence. And the reality was she was having chemotherapy and taking meds, and it made her unstable, it made her balance unstable. There was no grounds for the complaint, and so it gets dropped. And I think lots of times it's those kinds of complaints. But I think it's why it's so important that we have the details. So if it really does reflect something that has more to do with climate within a school, or a real trend of complaints about one specific either program, person, whatever, then to look at it in a slightly different way. But I think all of these issues do need to be handled in a very respectful way, because there are things that need to be addressed that are valid, and we really have a responsibility. There are other things that are more nebulous, but we still need to look at. And then there are things that are really and truly unfounded and have been made for whatever reason.
Thank you. Anything else? Did I hear somebody? No. Okay. I mean, and this is just something that has just kind of always concerned me, is that it goes to Miss Reiser, who I think is doing an absolutely fabulous job. But when it comes to, I mean, she is just, I'm just very happy with everything that she's done. So I just want you to know that, TC. But when it comes to the superintendent and things go to her and then they go to the president, TC is, and her supervisor and her boss is Mr. Elder. And so why I've always been for having like an inspector general that sits outside of, APS, just because of that relationship. And so I think that's something that, has just always, since I first got on the board, has just always been concerning to me, no matter who the superintendent was. So I think that's something that we need to also think about. And so then the question, if no one else has anything, the only question that I have, Ms. Reiser, is when I'm looking at the complaints and we're looking at the, by location, and we're looking at elementary, middle, high, and then we're looking at district. And so there's, 24 complaints at the district level. So I just kind of, if you kind of look at any trends there when it comes to at the district level, do you see anything that might be going on? Because when you're looking at, even like, the high school, there was only 7, but yet at the district level, there was, 24. And when you think about how many employees and, kids and parents are at a high school, I'm just wondering if you see something there.
Amber Mueller-Aragon. What I will say is where I have seen any kind of trend, repeat reporting, we have utilized our outside investigators so that it is an impartial individual doing that investigation. So you'll see that there's quite a few listed with an outside investigator, which I'm looking for that.
The external and the type of investigation, external was 8 and internal was 30. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. So where I do see a trend, we have utilized an outside investigator. And so for example, in previous reports, I've talked about repeat reportings where maybe 2 or 3 people reported the same incident that increased the numbers. So even though there's 8 outside investigators, that those investigators might be looking into multiple reports. So, and that way it is very unbiased. And those interviews are done by somebody outside of Albuquerque Public Schools.
Okay, thank you. If there isn't anything else, I need a motion and a second.
So I will move to accept the ethical advocate statistics for the period of July 1st, 2022 through December 31st, 2022.
Thank you.
This is Barbara. I'll second.
Okay, wonderful. Dr. Albright, if I could have a roll call vote, please.
Renette Apodaca,
Yes.
Barbara Brownstein, Sarah Brownstein, Josefina Dominguez,
Yes.
Scott Elder,
Yes.
Danielle Gonzalez,
Yes.
Courtney Jackson,
Yes.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova,
Yes.
Barbara Peterson,
Yes.
Heather Snenden,
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero,
Yes.
and Peggy Mole Aragon.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Good discussion. Okay, our next item up for discussion is consideration for approval to convene in executive session pursuant to the Open Meetings Act, NMSA 1978 10-15-1 H2 for the purpose of discussing limited personnel matters in connection with the activity fund audits. So I need a motion for this, and this can kind of be a long one there, but.
So moved. This is Josefina.
Second, this is Danielle.
Okay, if we could just make sure that we're do it more specifically, if you could, Ms. Dominguez.
More specifically to, okay, I move that we move into executive session for consideration of, sorry.
That's okay. It's a long one. That's why I said it's kind of a long one.
Let's see. Yes, I move to go into executive session pursuant to the Open Meetings Act, NMSA 1978, sections 10-15-1 H2 for the purpose of discussing limited personnel matters in connection with activity fund audits.
Great.
I'll second.
Okay, Dr. Albright, if I could have a roll call vote, please.
I believe that Board Member Gonzalez already seconded. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
I think she
Okay.
already did. Yes,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Renette Apodaca,
Yes.
Sarah Brownstein, Josefina Dominguez,
Yes.
Scott Elder,
Yes.
Danielle Gonzalez,
Yes.
Courtney Jackson,
Yes.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Yes.
Barbara Peterson,
Yes.
Heather Snenden,
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero,
Yes.
and Peggy Mole Aragon.
Yes. Okay, if